Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Blackheath Community College, and welcome to our Bear River Commemoration, our first day. We're very honored to welcome Reggie and his wife, Rose, to the community to share their knowledge with us about leadership and communication and all the things that we know we need to do better, but we're hoping to come up with a different way of how we address that in a cultural way. Part of the series of events that we see throughout the year is funded by our Department of Education grant, which seeks to bring in cultural knowledge to our staff, faculty,
Good morning.
and of course the events that we see in the community. And we are honored to host things like this in order to give our people exposure to a new way of thinking, but oftentimes it's reaffirming to your own worldview how these things come out. And that when we take the lessons today and we bring those into our everyday lives, and we go with that every day as learners and as people in our community that care and want our community to thrive. So I also acknowledge Chairman Jarvis made it, and that we're excited to have the support of our incredible leadership as we continue to get more acquainted with these styles and these ways of doing things that we're in fact revitalizing within our community. So I would like to invite Reggie Crow Shoe up here to introduce her father, Reggie, who's going to be doing our presentation today. So here's Reggie Crow Shoe.
Just so you know, I'm a alumni from here. Way back in. Okie, we stood at Donegal City. I'm happy to be back here, but I'm also very honored to be able to sit back and open up my ears so that I can listen more. I'm honored to introduce my father, Howell Garcina. He has been working in this area for many, many years. Even when I was a kid, I was a young kid out at my grandma and grandpa's house helping them. My grandfather would always tell him, "Come out, I need to see you." They'd come out and they'd have these long discussions, as well as our ways of knowing. We continue to talk with them. So from that and beyond that, he has created a space where conversations and discussions can happen in a kind way within our Mexican way of doing things. And I'm very honored to welcome up my father, Howell Garcina, and Dr. Reggie Crow Shoe, to your community.
I think this mic works, huh?
You should use the regular one too.
Oh, this one. Oh, okay. Okay. Hitamix kanoten. Am skapi pikante. Kaya yuhtoks po.
Gotta speak into it.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's.
speak into it, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. I gotta hold it close to. It's always good to come down and visit. I'm skapi pikan niksu koi. Come down and visit and talk about old times, the old people that we used to come and visit. But today's a real new world that we live in. I wanted to talk a bit about who I am. I'm from Apatsipikani, from Brockett, from North Pikani, and I was born and raised on the Pikani Reserve. So I went to residential school in the west end of the reserve, because the reserve was kind of divided. The east end all went to Sacred Heart Catholic residential school, and the west end went to St. Cyprian Anglican school. So I didn't even know my wife back then. The church told us not to associate with those different parts of the reserve because they were different religion. So that I knew of her family, but I never met any of them. Here we're from the same reserve. So that's what happens when different influences come into your community. So I was born and raised on the reserve, and I pretty well learned Blackfoot from, my family growing up. So this morning I wanted to talk about, I think it was transformative leadership. But transformative leadership is a white man word. So if we try and translate it into Blackfoot, we're going to get all mixed up in different understanding. I come from a mind where I think in Blackfoot, but anytime I hear something, I translate it into Blackfoot so I can understand it. And then I translate it back into English to try and, explain my thoughts in English about what I heard. So I hear the old lady always calling it, my grandmother always calling it, an Indian thinker. And then on the other side, she always talks about white man thinker. So there's definitely the two that I experienced in my lifetime. So when I look at the word transformative leadership, I imagine there's a Western definition how we can use that word, but I'm viewing it from an indigenous perspective. So I'm going to talk about it from that perspective that I know. I think it's important to know that indigenous knowledge exists. And indigenous knowledge is an oral knowledge. You need to know the language to access the stories, and then out of the stories you get your knowledge and wisdom. And that's how I was taught when I was young, why I was taught the language so I can understand the stories. But when we look at Western knowledge is written. I guess that's why when we went to residential school, I was taught ABCs and how to make words with those letters and how to make sentences and how to read. That was what I was taught. But you had to learn that alphabet because Western knowledge is written. You can go to a library and it's full of Western knowledge. You can pick out knowledge and read it. So the written knowledge is different from the oral knowledge. And we need to know the language so that we can access that oral knowledge. Thinking about oral knowledge, I look at oral knowledge is lived knowledge. So it's stories. I hate to call them stories, but I look at them as, I look at them not as stories, but I look at them as narratives of research that's being done by our our elders in our language, our grandfathers and our relatives and our grandparents and great-grandparents. They didn't speak English, but they still did research. And what they did in research was part of their lives. So they expressed that research in their language, and that's where we look at narratives of different stories. So when I look at indigenous concepts, we look at creation stories as things that talk about science, indigenous science. We look at creation stories as laws. We look at creation stories as knowledge itself. So we think about those creation stories, and there's many creation stories. We believe in those that they are knowledge and laws and sciences. In Western man-made laws, they're written, so you can read Western laws. But whether you believe in them or not is something else. In our case, those are stories that we're given that we believe in, and we believe that they are laws and we follow them. So those are the difference in stories, but there's also stories that I categorize as relatives. Nikshukoi. Relative stories are stories that talk about systems of how we do things, how we treat each other, how we work together, how we achieve goals together. Those are systems. But I hear the old-timers talking about Nikshukua as a concept of how we work together to achieve goals, being a relative. So that was important. And then we hear, of course, stories of Napi, stories that give us those moral values and principles that we use. So there's many different layers of stories in our language, and it's all those stories that is what we look at as an indigenous knowledge. So which is a lot different from Western knowledge. Now when I was, I'll talk a bit about my own personal experiences in growing up. When I was young, my mother got sick. She got consumption or TB, and in them years, they didn't look after the illness right at a clinic or at home. They sent you right out of the community. So my mother was sent out of Bikini community at about, for 5 years. And I was 6 months old when she was sent out. So my grandmother, Ikis Chanopata, she took over and looked after me. She was born in 1880, and she was already quite old when she looked after me. But she didn't speak English. So right from 6 months old, I spent my time following the old lady around, listening to her and listening to language and picking up what I need to pick up. So she told me a lot, but at one point she told me, "Kya go to Ishkinimatsuk?" Ishkinimatsuk is talking about how you're going to go learn, be shown something. You're going to learn something. So I said, all right. I just followed her around. And she brought us to a house in Bikani. And when we walked in, everybody was in the house. But the younger kids were put together on the side. And then at that time, she talked to me. That's when I first heard about the little birds. She said, "These are sistiks. You're gonna become part of the little birds, and you're going to learn. All right, so I just followed her along. I knew she brought stuff in to pay for my become a little bird. So when we joined, we got together, and these are some of the things I'm thinking about when we were taught in an oral way. It's a lot different being taught in a written context, but in our oral way, we were taught through that society. We were taught about the venue. So when we got together, the old man or the old lady, it was our grandfathers and grandmothers in the community that took turns talking to us. But every time they made smudge, they would say, okay, you're coming in. Once I make smudge, you all become little birds. You might be different little birds, but you're all little birds. You're not humans. You all become little birds. You're not humans anymore. So you take on that concept, that thought. But when you're sitting in a nest, then the old people would say, okay, since you're all little birds, now you're all related. You're brothers and sisters. So you have to work together to learn what you need to learn. So then you start learning in a different way. We weren't given rules where you post on the wall to say you don't run around in the classroom, you don't just walk in and out of a classroom, you ask for permission. We didn't. It wasn't a written system. It was an oral system. So our laws came in stories. One story I remember is the old lady saying, if a little bird, if they don't listen, they'll run around in the nest, and they're not flying yet. If they fall over, there's a coyote at the bottom of the tree. He's going to have a snack. Or they would say, if you all run around, you're going to spill the nest. And the coyote is going to have not a snack, but he'll have a feast. So you hear these stories, but what they were doing is they were giving responsibility to each and every one of those relatives. So when we see our brothers and our sisters running around in the nest, we would stop them. Oh, wait a minute, don't run around, you're going to fall. There's a coyote down there. So we learn to take that responsibility to stop each other, which was important when we talk about, especially a big part of the smudge. When they make it and turn you into a little bird, a big part of that smudge is what they call gimmapipits, and kindness for everybody. So you start learning kindness for your relatives. You start learning to be responsible to your relatives at that young age in the nest. So later on I want to talk about transformational leadership, what that means. Because if you can pick up that being kind to your relatives and being responsible for your relatives to help them achieve, in this case in the little birds, it was safety, so we don't get hurt. But to achieve that goal together, I think you start picking up those concepts of transformative leadership at that young age. It's not coming out and saying, well, I have the power, I'll tell you what to do, you listen to me. It wasn't about any of that. It was that knowledge, oral knowledge that was given to us that we used to show that kindness and leadership in the amongst your brothers and sisters. I look at, when I went to residential school, and as I talk, I'm going to jump back and forth between a written system, which was residential school, and the oral system of our, not only our societies, but the way we do things in an oral culture. But when I went to residential school, if I ran around in the class or got up and spoke up, even schools today, the teacher will send you to the principal, and the principal will deal with you. And so you take your punishment there. But children today aren't given the responsibility like the little birds were given to be responsible for each other. They have a third party authority, which is a principal that looks after it. And the policies are what they follow in written context. Those are rules that they have to follow, which is a lot different than what I learned in the nest. So that responsibility was given to each and every one of us when we were young. I think about, well, I hear these stories and I sit in the ceremony or in the circle with the other little birds, but I never seen the coyote. They always said the coyote's gonna eat you if you run around. I never seen the coyote, but yet I believed in the story that the coyote existed. So I didn't break the laws, but I never seen. So I always think, if you do something that you weren't given a right to, the coyote's gonna get you. So if we do things that we weren't given a right, let's say songs today, we look at our songs, we look at our ways of healing, or look at our ways of ceremony, for example. And if I just watched the ceremony and I went in and I sang the song without getting a transfer to that song, then I'm doing something wrong. The coyote's gonna get me. But the coyote, I always think of it as an invisible jurisdiction. If I do something that I wasn't supposed to do, and I hear this from the old people quite a bit, your relatives, you're putting them in danger. They can get sick, they can end up in death, they can get an accident. Those are things you think about when you're following those oral laws, but they come with an invisible jurisdiction, which was the coyote I never seen. When I look at residential school, they have real jurisdiction. Their real jurisdiction is the written document, and if you do something wrong, then you go to the principal, and the principal is going to give you the punishment that you earned. But anyway, so that's what I call a real jurisdiction. That's where you're dealt with. If I'm driving down the road and a policeman stops me and gives me a ticket to go to court for speeding, then I go to court. That's real jurisdiction, or a third-party jurisdiction. But in our way, we have that invisible jurisdiction. That's why we really watch and believe in stories and the way we do things in our oral ways. So those are some of the things I started learning when I was young about the different ways of learning. I went to residential school for the 9 years. At 5, they took me from my grandmother and ended up at residential school. But, later on in life, I work with the University of Calgary in their Indigenous strategy, but the last probably 20 years, Rose and I have been working on researching on what are systems. You know, a system is what we look at as a norm or an understanding of how we do things, different steps or processes of how we do things to get things done. And that's a system. Western concepts have their written systems, their scientific systems, but we also have our oral system, our stories, our indigenous systems, our relative systems. Those, we thought about those two, and we talked about how are we going to understand. If we don't explain to our young people that two systems exist, they're going to continually get stuck between two systems and get mixed up and not know how they can help each other. So that's why we've done as much as we could in the concept in doing research or an understanding in systems, oral systems and written systems. So that is why we looked at stories and how we made our decisions with the elders. So when I was with the old lady, before I went to residential school, I understood the process of coming together. We always had a smudge to start us off. We sat in a circle. And in them days we sat they brought us to a house. In the summer they put us in a teepee. And in the winter went to different houses. And sometimes we're down by the river, or sometimes we're in the flats. But I never questioned it, I just followed. But later on I came to realize why the old people moved us around was because the Indian agent outlawed ceremonies, and they didn't want us to get caught. As we had those little birds coming together, they would call it a ceremony, and their threat was, you know, anybody having a ceremony, the Indian agent and the RCMP are going to come and throw you in jail, or you're going to be in trouble. So later on I realized that's why they moved us around, because they didn't want the Indian agent to know where we're at. So those were ceremonies that they had in the old days. They had many ceremonies. They had thunderpipe, and they had beavers, they had ceremonies, but they moved them around. I remember hearing a story of me, Kiapi, red old man. One time he said, I'm not going to move around anymore. Go tell that Indian agent to bring the police and himself to come over. I'm going to open my thunderpipe, and if they want to throw us all in jail, let them throw us in jail. So he opened his thunderpipe, everybody came, but the police and the Indian agent just parked by the road and watched, but he never got into trouble for that. So that's when things started changing, when that old man challenged that authority of the Indian agent. So those were, I would look at the days when Indian agents really, and the Indian Act, really had authority over our people on the reserve. And it was a system. I kind of look at it like a concentration camp. We can't leave the reserve, and we need to ask for a permit to leave the reserve. Even the parents couldn't visit their children at residential school without that permission from the Indian agent. So those were all the systems, that Western systems that ran the community back then. So I go back to our oral systems and the stuff that I heard from them. I look at knowledge